Hello and welcome to the first episode of earlymusicsources.com. My name is Elam Rotem and today we're going to talk about early Basso Continuo. In this short video we'll present the sources of the early Basso Continuo as well as answer some frequently asked questions. So here are the main sources for the early Basso Continuo in the first decades of the 17th century. There are only three treatises that are dedicated to Basso Continuo alone: Bianciardi, Agazzari, and Sabatini. Then we have other treatises that talk about many other things, but mention Basso Continuo: Di Ruta, Banchieri, Pretorius, and an anonymous treatise called Il Corrago that talks about opera productions. Then we have prefaces to motet collections. These include the famous text by Viadana, the first most extensive writing about Basso Continuo. Notice, however, that as opposed to treatises that speaks generally, this kind of prefaces to music collections normally refers specifically to the performance of the music in that collection. It's important to acknowledge that when reading them. Staden is also worth noting, as his writing is also relatively extensive and bear a title of a small treatise. The last group, which contains the very first descriptions of Basso Continuo, is the group of the innovators who first published music in the new style, the stile rappresentativo: Cavalieri, Caccini, Peri, and so on. If you'd like to gaze at this list a little longer, you can go to this link on our website. And now let's continue to the frequently asked questions. Question number 1. Do we have some written out realizations of early Basso Continuo? That's quite sad, but in the case of keyboard realizations, the answer is actually no, we don't. The examples given by Agazzari and Bianciardi are without context. It's just some chords on the keyboard. So a central question concerning the relation between the realization and the voice remains unanswered. Otherwise, we have some other sources that, while they are not really a realization of Basso Continuo part, they might be very similar to such. We have the written out accompaniments of the late Renaissance. These include the famous and beautiful Madrigali by Luzzaschi, and of course the newly surfaced Carlo G manuscript. While they are not actual realizations of any bass, they may give us ideas on issues like texture, number of voices, and their relation to the solo singer. Another precious source that we have is Emilio de Cavalieri's Rappresentazione di Anima e di Corpo. Not only that it is the first piece printed with Basso Continuo, among all the music publications from that time, it has the most detailed and accurate figuration. Following the figures carefully will result in many instances with an equivalent to written out realizations. Question number 2. Is it important to play in 4 voices all the time? Not at all. There is no source whatsoever that asks that. The examples we have from Bianciardi and Agazzari change between 4 and 5 voices and sometimes 3 voices. In fact, a repeated point in many sources is that the accompaniment should fit itself to the forces at hand. If it's only one soloist, play with few voices. And if it's 4 choirs with voices and instruments, play full with hands and feet. In the Carlo G manuscript, this point is demonstrated clearly. The number of voices is constantly inconstant. Question number 3. Should one avoid doubling the solo part? Well, if we look at the written out Renaissance accompaniments, it is clearly seen that the voices are constantly doubled. This is not surprising, as it corresponds to the general 16th century tradition of simply playing all the parts of the piece as accompaniment. In Cavalieri's Rappresentazione, where we are talking about a real Basso Continuo part, we see very clearly that the voices are asked to be doubled by the continuo figures. Viadana asks that in cadences, the realization will double the voices in their exact position. That is, that in cadences, at least some of the voices will be doubled. The only source that actually asks to avoid doubling the soprano part is Agazzari's, but his comment is in the context of avoiding making mistakes in general and avoiding interrupting the singers with diminutions, so it could be that it's not necessarily an artistic or sonoric preference. Otherwise, really avoiding the soprano part all the time might result in weird realizations. Question number 4. Are there things that all the sources agree upon? Yes, they all agree that the continuo accompaniment should support the singers and not disturb them. It should not be too strong or too weak. It should be in accordance to the amount of performers. It should be in such a manner that allows the text of the singers to be clearly understood. Ornaments and diminutions are allowed only if they do not disturb, confuse, or overshadow the singers. These are all things that sound rather obvious to us, but may reflect the reality where accompanists might have been too creative, then as today. So we hope you enjoyed this first episode of earlymusicsources.com. Please feel free to comment, share, disagree, dislike. No, like. See you next time at earlymusicsources.com.